Today, we're going to unravel the story of a monument that fascinated and, let's be honest, kind of freaked people out for over 4 decades, right up until its very, very explosive end.
It all came to a dramatic close on this day. Imagine this. In the pre-dawn quiet of a Georgia field, a sudden explosion turns a local landmark and a global conspiracy icon into a pile of rubble.
So you gotta ask, what was this thing, and who would want to blow it up? Well, to answer those questions, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a very strange request from an even stranger man.
So where did this all come from? The story doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a handshake and a really bizarre proposal.
Meet our mystery man, who called himself R.C. Christian. He just walks into the Elberton Granite Finishing Company with this incredibly specific and very expensive vision. He told them his group had been planning this whole thing for 20 years.
And this is where it gets wild. This wasn't just a statue. It was basically a giant, complex astronomical instrument. I mean, it had a hole for sighting the North Star, a slot to track the seasons. The whole idea was that it would guide the survivors of some future catastrophe, which this guy Christian cryptically called the coming age of reason.
But you know, it wasn't the fancy astronomical features that made the Guidestones so infamous. Oh no. It was the message they carved into the surface for the entire world to see.
And get this, they were thinking big, like really big. By using both modern and ancient languages, the creators were sending a message that was meant to last through the ages, for literally any civilization to find.
And this was commandment number 1. The line that started it all, and by far the most shocking. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. 500 million people. That's it.
Okay, look at this chart. It really puts it all into perspective. The guideline called for 500 million people. But back in 1980, when the monument was actually built, there were already 4.4 times billion of us. And today, over 8 billion. So you can see why people immediately jumped to some pretty dark conclusions. To many, this was a sinister depopulation plot, like the 10 Commandments of the Antichrist, handed down by some shadowy group.
For 42 years, the monument just stood there, this silent beacon for tourists and conspiracy theorists alike. And then, almost as mysteriously as it arrived, it was gone.
And check out how fast this all went down. An explosion at 4 in the morning turns one of the massive slabs to rubble. But by that same afternoon, the authorities made the call to level the entire thing, saying it was for safety. Now, for a lot of people, that seemed suspiciously fast, almost like there was a rush to just erase the whole thing from the map.
For decades, there was this legend that a time capsule was buried underneath the Guidestones, holding all the secrets of who built it and why. Well, the demolition gave everyone the first and only chance to finally find out.
And the answer just made everything even weirder. They dug down and they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just dirt. Another total dead end. But you know, maybe the real key wasn't buried in the ground. Maybe it was hiding in plain sight the whole time.
So, was this whole thing really a blueprint for some evil global cabal? Well, there is another way to look at this entire story, and it all comes down to the timing.
This really brings us to the 2 big ideas. Was this a sinister plan to wipe out most of humanity, or was it a guide for whoever was left after some kind of cataclysm? And here it is. This is the critical piece of context. 1979. The world was on a razor's edge, basically one button push away from total nuclear winter. And if you look at the Guidestones through that lens, the message starts to sound a whole lot different.
This quote just captures that alternative theory perfectly. The Guidestones weren't a threat, they were a manual, like a post-apocalyptic survival guide for rebuilding society. Instructions on how to avoid petty laws, value reason, and live in balance with nature after the old world had already destroyed itself.
So the stones are gone, but man, the questions are still here. And while we might never know the full story, researchers have actually uncovered some pretty compelling clues.
So who was R.C. Christian? Well, a lot of investigators now believe he was a man named Herbert Kirsten. He was a doctor from Iowa who had some really strong, well-documented beliefs about population control and eugenics. Ideas that, map almost perfectly onto the Guidestones message. So he's a very plausible candidate for the mastermind here.
But we'll probably never get official confirmation. The one guy who knew for sure, the local banker Wyatt Martin, who handled all the arrangements, he kept his promise of secrecy.
He took the identity of that small group of loyal Americans right to his grave.
And so, this is where we're left. Whether they were a sinister plot or just a sincere, if kind of creepy, attempt to help humanity, the Guidestones became this magnet for all our collective anxieties. So the final question isn't just about who built them. It's about why were we all so obsessed? What does that say about our own deep-seated fears of collapse, control, and whatever comes next?